The framing or perspective for the Sunday service on the weekends honoring Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are never really all that easy to figure out. Much of the complications lie in centering the voice and experience of MLK and African Americans in our country, which in my case, and in many other UU congregations, is done through mostly the eyes of white folks. So as much as we try, it is a messy proposition. In the beginning of these annual commemorations, I know there were congregations that just read the I Have a Dream speech, which honestly is brilliant. But Unitarian Universalists centering the speech year after year certainly seems a little problematic. Then there have been lots of efforts to bring Dr. King's perspective about economic justice and his opposition to the Vietnam War into the conversation. Again, important but hard to do year after year. And for me and many of my colleagues, we have also made the point of lifting up the letter from the Birmingham jail, which among other things lifts up his frustration with white moderates. It's just a paragraph in a very long letter, but for me as a Unitarian Universalist minister who's always served majority white congregations, it was used to make a point. So maybe again, one more time, let me share that one paragraph of this long letter, which many of you may have heard before, even probably from me. But it goes like this. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white Christian counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So the question then becomes, how do we design a Unitarian Universalist service that centers Dr. King and the African American experience without tokenizing the people of color we ask to participate in the service, and without centering white people in the service, and without sugarcoating the message of beloved community for this yearly celebration? This year, I decided to heck with it. I'm just going to be a white minister that talks to mostly white folks in the congregation about doing this work and hope that if Dr. King ever knew about this, he might actually appreciate us having that conversation. I want to make it clear that we are not an all-white congregation. There are and have been a growing number of people of color, and I deeply honor your presence. And the insidious way that systems of white supremacy works leave us all having to reflect on its presence in our lives and in the waters in which we all swim. Yet folks of color in this congregation, especially our black siblings and their ancestors, have already taken too much grief, experienced too much pain, and have had to do too much work to live in this country. Racism, and I don't mean simply prejudice, I mean racism, which I will define for today as a system of one race feeling like they are superior and trying to exercise their power to keep systems in place that reinforce that belief. Racism is alive and well and deeply ingrained in the political and social polarization of these times. You see, I believe that racism is like rainwater on a leaky roof. It will find its way over time to do the most damage possible to the structures it weakens and degrades. Don't teach CRT in the schools. All lives matter. Make America great again. And the big one right now, voting rights. Rainwater, weakening and degrading the structure of our ideals, our hopes, and of our dreams of beloved community. About voting rights, Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, said recently that if voting rights are still hanging in the balance on MLK Day, she's calling for supporters to speak and act in a way to ensure that this nation lives up to its promise of democracy by putting pressure on our United States Senate to bypass the filibuster, and instead of taking the King holiday off, they should make it a day on to pass the Voting Rights Act. Folks, we are in it. We actually have always been in it in this country, and folks of color can rarely, if ever, forget that. But as white folks, many of us just don't have to think about it as much. Sure, we have plenty to be angry about. The lack of justice, the shooting of unarmed black men and women by law enforcement, but honestly, those wounds just aren't really felt the same way as by those who have lost friends and relatives and ancestors because of this unjust system based on fear, othering, hate, and how that treats people of color. I want you to listen to Bishop Desmond Tutu's words about finally being able to vote in his country. It may bring some perspective about why voting rights are so meaningful to all those in our country who struggled for so long to get them and to keep them. On being able to vote at age 63 for the first time, he said, "How do you describe falling in love? It was an incredible experience. For you, going to the ballot box is really a political act. For us, it was a religious act. It was a spiritual experience because you walked into the polling booth one person with all the history of oppression and injustice and all the baggage that we were carrying, and you walk in and you make your mark and you put the ballot in the box and you emerge on the other side and you are a different person. You are transfigured. And now you actually count in your own country." Hey, I mean, it was really close to a Cloud 9 experience. We were transformed from ciphers into persons. So what does this all mean? To tell you the truth, I'm not sure. We're all tired and probably pretty traumatized from years of our politics being defined by endless reactions to far-right conservative shenanigans, although I was going to say another word there. There are many in this congregation, many who've worked for years and by years, some 50 or 60 years or more, on this rainstorm of racism, as the rain has been working to degrade this structure for all of our lifetimes. Even in this progressive faith community, we've had to navigate our feelings about the term white supremacy and the feelings that we couldn't possibly be part of any system that goes against our values. To that, I would say that I have done a ton of training and reflection about this work, and I am pained by how often I have found the ways the rain has seeped into my structure, trying to unleash its poisoning effect on the structures that sustain me. With all this, then, what do we do? Well, I'm about to tell you what I have best come to after all these years. First of all, this stuff is messy. And as I said so many times, there's no one right way to do it. So if you're going to be in it and try to do this work, there are times when it's going to hurt. And you may also hurt somebody else. And that's why we practice being in right relations. Because we are going to need to reflect on our thoughts, our speech, and our action, as well as being ready to apologize and acknowledge hurt and pain. Because if you want to do this work and you want to be in mutually accountable relationships, this is going to happen. Another thing to do is to do work around comfort and risk. I would like to stand here today and talk about how hopeful I am for the future. I would love that, in fact. And in the long run, I believe that we're changing for the better forever. However, we've got some really tough stuff to get through before we get to that really, really hopeful place. And we are in some stuff now. And I'm guessing many of us, whether we have done this work before or not, whether we have marched, whether we have written letters, whether we've made phone calls or many other things, we're going to have to think about the level of comfort and the level of risk we are willing to take now, not 5 years ago, or in the 60s, or in the 70s, or in the 80s, but now. Because hanging a banner is one thing, and holding a panel discussion is another, but are we willing to take back the space currently owned by the anti-everything forces that march outside the Fairfax County School Board meetings without any opposition? I, and many of you, have witnessed some of the most consequential moments in the history of the struggles of this country with the systems of white supremacy and racism. And with all the progress that's been made, the system is pushing back hard. What we heard yesterday in yesterday's teaching by Dr. King, he called it white backlash. And it's been going on as long as any progress has ever been made. But we are going to try and push back a little ourselves. The Racial Justice Steering Committee and the professional and lay leadership of this congregation have committed to supporting the teaching of inclusive history in schools. We don't know where that will go, but it is part of building a new roof to protect our structures from the rainstorm that keeps sending its water year after year after year to find the cracks. And I hope in our little corner of this world, we can help fill those cracks and do what we can to rise up, to help fill the cracks in the roof in order to support a sound foundation for now and for the many years to come. The time is now. The place is here, and we all must be the ones. Amen, and may that be so.